Never underestimate a quiet woman. She was thrown out barefoot in the rain like trash. But by sunrise, the entire village watched her return with police, court papers, and power in her hands. What happened next left even her enemies begging for mercy. You won't believe how she turned the tables. In the town of Doma, people believed Kezia lived a perfect life. She was married to Tobi, a successful trader with charm and wealth, or so it seemed. To outsiders, Tobi was a good husband, and Kezia, the lucky wife of a prosperous man. But behind their compound's high walls, the truth was bitter. Kezia was treated like a maid. She washed, cooked, cleaned, and still faced insults every day. Tobi barked orders, came home late, and hardly looked at her. He didn't love her. He never did. Tobi had married her only because of her father, Chief Mufaro, a respected and powerful man in Doma. Everyone in the village had once bowed to Chief Mufaro, and when he passed, they believed his wealth had gone to his daughter. Tobi saw Kezia as a ticket to power and fortune. He smiled at her in public, but once the doors closed, he changed into someone else. Loud, careless, and cruel. After her father's death, Kezia fell into silence. She refused to attend village events. Her aunt, Mama Dira, had begged her not to marry Tobi, but Kezia, blinded by loyalty and the hope of peace, ignored the warnings. She thought maybe love would grow, but it never did. Instead, she found herself trapped in a marriage filled with pain and loneliness. No one knew that Kezia was the one holding the house together. The neighbors saw Tobi driving a fine wagon, wearing new clothes, and speaking boldly at the market. They never guessed that it was Kezia who paid the rent, bought the food, and even paid for the repairs when the roof leaked. Her father, before passing, had secretly left her a large sum of money, hidden from everyone, including Tobi. She used it carefully, not to live lavishly, but just to survive. Still, Kezia never exposed him. She smiled when villagers greeted her. She nodded when elders praised her marriage. Inside, her heart ached, but she never let it show. She believed in dignity, she believed in patience, and she knew something no one else did, something that gave her strength when Tobi shouted, when he blamed her for things she never did, when he stayed out all night. She knew this life, this false power Tobi held, was built on sand, and she was waiting quietly for the wind to blow. Every night, she sat by the window and remembered her father's last words. Every morning, she stitched clothes for extra money and hid it beneath the floorboard. Every insult, every silence, every act of betrayal, she buried it deep inside, not out of fear, but out of quiet preparation. She knew her moment would come, not with noise, not with revenge, but with something stronger, truth. And while Tobi played the king, Kezia waited like a lioness, silent in the tall grass. Because though the village saw her as weak, though Tobi saw her as powerless, Kezia knew one thing for sure. She was not the guest in that house. She was the owner. In the beginning, Tobi acted like the perfect husband. He brought Kezia flowers, smiled sweetly in public, and told everyone how lucky he was to have her. But it was all for show. The moment Kezia signed the marriage papers, his sweet words turned into sharp ones. The house grew colder, not because of the weather, but because Tobi no longer hid who he truly was. He called Kezia barren and useless. He said her presence brought him bad luck. Every small thing became her fault. If business was slow, it was Kezia. If it rained too much, it was Kezia. He even told her she had cursed his life. The truth was, Tobi never loved Kezia. His heart had always belonged to someone else. Lamia, a striking woman from the village of Taida. Lamia had beauty that turned heads and a tongue that spit poison. She laughed at Kezia, calling her a shadow wife, someone who existed only in name. Tobi didn't hide his affair. He left home at night, claiming he had late market runs, but everyone knew where he went. The whispers in Doma grew louder, but no one dared say anything to Kezia's face. She walked through the village with her head held high, even when her heart felt like stone. Lamia treated Kezia with open mockery. She once came to Kezia's shop just to flaunt a necklace Tobi had given her, a necklace bought with Kezia's own money. Kezia stood still, her face calm, her eyes hiding the storm inside. People expected her to break, to scream, to leave, but Kezia did none of those things. She stitched fabrics, smiled at customers, and saved every single coin she earned, quietly, patiently. What no one knew was that Kezia had a secret, one she held close to her heart like a flame in the dark. Before Chief Mufaro died, he had written a letter. In that letter, he explained something Tobi never knew. Along with the letter was a small iron key, rusted, old-looking, but powerful. Kessia kept both hidden in her pillowcase, reading the letter every month, just to remind herself that everything happening now was temporary. Her father had known Tobi's heart. He had warned her in his own way, not with words, but with wisdom, and Kessia had listened. While Tobi wasted money on Lamia and humiliated her at every turn, Kessia waited. She didn't shout, she didn't beg, she planned. With each coin she saved, each insult she endured, each tear she wiped away at night, she got one step closer to the day she would rise. Because though Tobi had the house, the wagons, and the village respect for now, he didn't know that the true power had never been his. It had always been hers. And when the time came, the letter and the key would open more than just a lock. They would open the truth. On the morning of her 27th birthday, Kessia sat quietly in her room, expecting nothing more than another cold day in Tobi's house. But a knock at the door changed everything. It was Barrister Endoro, her late father's trusted lawyer. He handed her a sealed envelope, worn with age, but carefully preserved. Inside was a letter written in her father's familiar bold handwriting. Her hands trembled as she read it. Line by line, the truth unfolded. Chief Mufaro had legally transferred all his properties, lands, and most importantly, the grand mansion they lived in, directly to Kessia just days before his sudden death. Her eyes widened. All this time, the house Tobi claimed as his, the place he brought Lamia to when Kessia was away, the very roof under which he shouted at her and mocked her, belonged to her, legally, fully, without question. Barrister Endoro confirmed it with documents, signatures, and official stamps. Kessia sat frozen. She had always believed her father left something for her, but she never imagined it was everything. For years she had allowed Tobi to live like a king under her roof, thinking it was better to keep peace than to claim power. She had swallowed insults, endured humiliation, and worked day and night, all while the real king of the house paraded as a peacock built on lies. She could have told him. She could have thrown the papers in his face the first time he raised his voice, but she didn't. Not because she was weak, but because she was watching, waiting. She wanted to see how far Tobi would go, how deep his betrayal would run. And now, as she stared at the will and deeds in her hand, she realized he had reached the end of his rope. That night, she tucked the letter and documents into the bottom of her wooden chest, beneath folded wrappers and old family photos. Her expression remained calm, her silence steady, but inside, something had shifted. The balance had changed. The puppet show Tobi was performing was almost over, and the curtain was about to fall. What Tobi didn't know was that the very house he walked around in like a landlord, the wide compound, the fine tiles, the carved doors, the mango trees in the backyard, it was all hers. Legally signed, witnessed, sealed. He had no claim, no power, and no idea. Kessia continued her days as usual. She cooked, she cleaned, she smiled when neighbors waved, but inside her a quiet fire had been lit. She knew Tobi's downfall would come, not with shouting or revenge, but with a piece of paper and a name, her name, the one her father had trusted, honored, and protected, even from the grave. And while Tobi laughed and spent nights with Lamia, believing he ruled everything, Kessia waited with the patience of a queen, because the mansion wasn't his stage. It was her throne, and soon the world would see exactly who truly owned it. Thunder roared above the quiet town of Doma. The rain beat down like drums on the rooftops, flooding the streets and soaking the earth. Inside the house, Kessia was folding her wrappers when the door slammed open. Tobi stood there with fire in his eyes. Behind him, Lamia leaned against the wall with a wicked smile curling on her lips. "You," Tobi barked, his voice echoing through the hall. "Pack your things and leave, tonight." Kessia blinked, thinking she misheard. "What?" "I said out," he roared. "Lamia is the new queen of this house. You are nothing now." Kessia stood still, stunned. Lamia didn't say a word. She just folded her arms, enjoying the show like a guest at a circus. Tobi marched over to Kessia's side of the room, yanked open her drawer, and threw her clothes into a small suitcase. Without care or pause, he stormed to the door and flung it open. The cold wind slapped Kessia's face as she stepped forward. Her suitcase was already lying in the mud, soaked. She wasn't even wearing shoes. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, some gasping, others shaking their heads in disbelief. No one dared to stop Tobi. He pointed to the road, his eyes wild. "If you don't leave now, I'll drag you myself." Kessia didn't argue. She didn't beg. She picked up her soaked wrapper, wrapped it tighter around her shivering body, and stepped outside. The rain fell like knives, chilling her to the bone, but she didn't look back. Tobi slammed the door behind her. Lamia's laughter rang out faintly through the wooden panels. The same house where she once made meals, cleaned floors, prayed for love. It now closed on her like a prison gate. But even as her feet sank into the wet clay road and her hair stuck to her face, Kessia did not cry. She walked through the storm, one slow step at a time. Lightning cracked across the sky, but in her heart, there was no fear. In her heart, a smile grew. Because while Tobi believed he had finally won, he had actually set himself up for the biggest fall of his life. He had thrown out the true owner of the house, the land, the legacy. He had kicked out the woman whose name was written on every title deed, whose father built that mansion brick by brick. And soon, when the sun rose again, the truth would burn brighter than any thunderstorm. Kessia kept walking, her bare feet splashing through puddles, her head high. The same neighbors who watched her humiliation would soon witness her rise. For she had not been defeated, she had been released. And as the wind howled and lightning danced in the sky, Kessia disappeared into the rain, with power tucked silently beneath her wet wrapper. As the sun slowly rose, casting a golden light over the misty fields, Kessia reached the edge of the city. Her clothes were still damp, her eyes tired, but she didn't stop. Her feet were sore, yet her spirit was steady. She walked straight to a tall brick building with a wooden sign that read, "Endoro and Partners, Legal Chambers." She stepped inside, her fingers gripping a small envelope and a golden key that had been hidden for years under her bed. It was her last gift from her father, Chief Mufaro, something she never thought she'd need to use. But now, it was time. Barrister Endoro, a tall, serious man with grey streaks in his hair, looked up in surprise when he saw her. "Kessia?" he asked, standing quickly. She nodded and handed him the letter and the key. He opened the letter slowly, reading her father's strong handwriting. His eyes widened as he read the final paragraph, where Chief Mufaro had declared Kessia the sole owner of all his properties, including the mansion Tobi had thrown her out of. Barrister Endoro's jaw tightened. "He really did it," he said. "Your father was a wise man. He knew trouble would come." He folded the letter carefully, placed it on his desk, and picked up the golden key. "This unlocks more than just a door. It unlocks your freedom." Without wasting time, he went to work. Within 2 hours, Barrister Endoro had filed urgent legal papers with the High Court. He brought out the original property deeds with Chief Mufaro's signature, along with the transfer documents that clearly named Kessia as the rightful owner. Once everything was in order, the court stamped the papers and authorized immediate enforcement. 2 stern-faced officers joined them, along with a court bailiff holding a thick folder of legal orders. The team was ready. As they drove back to Doma, Kessia sat quietly in the car, staring out the window. This wasn't revenge, this was justice. For years, she had been quiet, allowing Tobi to play the king in a palace built by her bloodline. But now, that act was over. Barrister Endoro looked at her with quiet respect. "By sundown, everyone will know. No more secrets. It's time they remember whose daughter you are." The road to Doma felt shorter this time. As the car rolled through the village gate, curious eyes followed them. Children stopped playing. Shopkeepers paused mid-sale. People whispered, wondering what brought police cars to Tobi's house. But Kessia didn't need to explain. She had the truth in her hands. The house that rejected her the night before would open its doors once more. This time, not to welcome her, but to return to her. And this time, she would not enter as someone's wife, but as the true heir of Chief Mufaro. The storm had passed. Now it was time for her sunrise. The morning air in Doma was filled with whispers and gasps. Word had spread like wildfire. Police cars were parked outside the grand mansion everyone believed belonged to Tobi. Curious neighbors, elders, children, even traders from nearby streets gathered in confusion, watching from a distance as officers moved with purpose. Inside the mansion, Tobi was still snoring on the couch, unaware of the storm that had arrived at his doorstep. He scratched his head, yawning loudly, when the loud knock shook the wooden door. He staggered up, shirtless and confused, and flung it open. "What is all this noise?" he barked, eyes squinting against the sun. Standing at the front was Barrister Endoro, flanked by 2 uniformed officers and a court bailiff. Behind them, calmly dressed and standing with quiet strength, was Kesia. The barrister stepped forward with papers in hand. His voice was steady and loud. By order of the Doma High Court, this property legally belongs to Madam Kesia Mufaro, daughter of the late Chief Mufaro. You, Tobi, are hereby evicted for unlawful occupation, emotional abuse, and property fraud. Tobi burst into laughter. What kind of madness is this? Kesia, own my house. Do you know who I am? Before he could say another word, the officer stepped forward and handed him the official court order. Tobi's smile froze. His eyes scanned the document, his hands trembling. This has to be fake. Just then, Lamia stumbled out of the bedroom, her robe clutched around her. What's happening? She asked, her voice shaking. The bailiff turned to her. Ma'am, you have 10 minutes to gather your belongings. This property is no longer under your control. Lamia's face turned pale. But, Tobi, you said this was your house. Tobi's mouth opened, but no words came. His confidence had crumbled. The officers moved swiftly, packing up bags, moving out boxes, and locking rooms. The crowd outside watched in silence, some with wide eyes, others whispering, "Isn't that Kesia, the one he kicked out last night?" Kesia stood tall. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't gloat. She stepped forward, face to face with Tobi, whose pride was now buried under shame. "You dragged me out barefoot in the rain," she said softly. "You humiliated me in front of the whole village. You made me feel like I was nothing. But you forgot one thing. This house, this land, this name, it all belongs to me." Tobi looked down, speechless. Kesia turned to the crowd, not with anger, but with grace. "To those who watched me walk away last night, I have returned, not as a victim, but as the rightful owner." And with that, she walked past Tobi, through the door he had once locked against her, and into the home that had always been hers. Justice had spoken, and Doma would never forget it. The moment Kesia reclaimed her home, everything around Tobi began to collapse. The news travelled faster than wildfire through Doma. Everyone was talking. At the market, the water well, and even the elders under the baobab tree. The man they once thought was wealthy and powerful had been exposed as a fraud. The house he boasted about didn't belong to him. The wife he mistreated owned it all. Tobi walked through the village with his head down, but he couldn't escape the shame. Children pointed. Traders refused to greet him. Women who once smiled at him now hissed and turned their backs. His customers at the trading post vanished overnight. No one wanted to buy goods from a man who couldn't even keep a roof over his own head. That same day, Lamia, the woman he chose over Kesia, packed her things and left without a word. She didn't even look back. She had only stayed because she thought Tobi was rich. Now that his secret was out, she wanted nothing to do with him. "You're a poor man in a borrowed house," she had whispered before slamming the gate behind her. Tobi had no one left. His friends stopped answering his calls. His own brothers crossed the road to avoid him. Even his mother refused to open her door when he came knocking. "I warned you not to mistreat that girl," she said from behind the door. "Now go and sleep in the street you threw her into." Days turned into weeks, and Tobi's clothes lost their shine. His once proud walk became a tired shuffle. Hunger replaced his pride. He wandered aimlessly around the village, begging for food and help. But the villagers had not forgotten how he had treated Kesia. They offered him nothing but harsh words and cold stares. One morning, he stood at the gates of the mansion that once gave him false pride. He knelt there for hours, hoping Kesia would see him, would listen, would give him even a drop of mercy. But Kesia never came to the gate. She had no words for him, only silence. He wept at the gate, not just from hunger, but from the weight of regret. He remembered her kindness, her patience, how she had stayed with him, even when he gave her every reason to leave. And still, he had thrown her out like she was worthless. Now, he had nothing, not even her forgiveness. The villagers walked past him, shaking their heads. "That's the man who threw away gold and picked dust," they'd say. "Now even the dust has blown away." Tobi's fall from grace was complete. He had once laughed loudly in the center of the village. Now, his cries were heard only by the wind. And Kesia, she never looked back. Kesia didn't return with noise or drama. She came back quietly, walking through the same gate where she had once been thrown out in the rain. There were no drums, no dancing, no speeches. She simply opened the front door, stepped inside, and started cleaning. She swept every corner of the mansion, wiped every dusty window, and lit incense in the rooms. The air smelled fresh again. Peace returned to the house. The villagers gathered slowly outside her compound. At first, they watched from a distance, unsure of what to say. Then, one by one, they began to clap, not for a show, but for respect. They had seen her humiliation. They had heard Tobi's cruel words. And yet, here she was, not broken, not bitter, but standing tall, calm, and proud. The same woman who walked out barefoot in the rain had now walked back with dignity and power. Some women wiped tears from their eyes. Men nodded in silence. Little girls clung to their mothers and whispered, "Mama, I want to be like Kesia when I grow up." Mothers smiled and said, "Then you must learn how to be strong and quiet like her. She is no ordinary woman." Even the village elders, who rarely praised anyone, began calling her the silent lioness. Not because she roared, but because she had fought her battle without shouting and still won. Her strength was not in her words, but in her patience. In a village where many reacted with fire, Kesia had chosen stillness, and yet she burned the loudest. She didn't talk about Tobi. She didn't mention Lamia. When people asked questions, she smiled gently and changed the topic. It wasn't because she had forgotten, but because she had risen above it. She had nothing to prove. Her victory spoke for itself. The house no longer felt like the place where she had once cried. It was now hers in every way. She redecorated it with bright colors and simple beauty. Flowers bloomed again in the garden. Birds returned to the trees. It was as if the mansion itself was happy she had come back. Young women started coming to her for advice. Some asked how she stayed strong. Others just sat in her presence, hoping her calm energy would rub off on them. Kesia welcomed them all. She didn't act like a queen, but she carried herself like one. Even the village chief came by one day, bringing a basket of gifts and saying, "We watched everything. You've made us proud. This village will always remember your name." Kesia didn't smile out of pride. She smiled because she had finally found peace, not just in her home, but in her heart. And that, more than anything, made her story unforgettable. 1 month after reclaiming her life, Kesia launched something no one in Doma expected. She didn't spend her days relaxing in her mansion or showing off her victory. Instead, she opened her doors to women from all walks of life. She called it Shandira, a word that meant stand tall in her mother's tongue. It wasn't just a name, it was a message to every woman who had been insulted, abandoned, or made to feel worthless. The project started small, just 10 women, then 20, then 50. Kesia used her savings and inheritance to offer small grants to women who wanted to start businesses, tailoring, farming, soap making, selling food. Whatever their dream was, she helped make it possible. But it wasn't just about money. She also gave them training. She brought teachers to the village to show them how to manage money, gain confidence, and find their voices again. Women who used to walk with their heads down now walked tall. Some brought their daughters along, teaching them early to be brave. Others brought bruises, both physical and emotional. But in Shandira, they found healing. Kesia welcomed them all. She sat among them, shared her own story, and told them gently, "If I could rise, so can you." Word spread fast. Within weeks, women from 5 nearby towns traveled to Doma just to be part of the program. The small village became a place of hope. People who once pitied Kesia now looked up to her with respect. One afternoon, 2 white vans rolled into the village. Journalists and TV crews had come from the city to cover the story that was making waves across the region. They filmed the women learning skills. They captured the joy and laughter that filled the Shandira compound. And finally, they interviewed Kesia herself, seated under a mango tree with a calm smile on her face. The reporter asked, "Kesia, the night you were thrown out barefoot in the rain, you didn't scream. You didn't fight back. What gave you that kind of strength to walk away without fear?" Kesia looked into the camera and smiled. Then she said, "Because I knew the house I was kicked from was already mine." Her words went viral. The video was shared across the country. People who had never heard of Doma now knew Kesia's name. She was invited to speak at women's conferences. Letters of gratitude poured in from strangers who felt inspired by her calm courage. But Kesia stayed rooted. She still lived in the same house, still walked to the same market, still poured tea for her guests. Fame didn't change her. If anything, it only made her mission clearer, to lift others the way she once had to lift herself. And through it all, The name Shandira echoed through the land, a reminder that no matter how hard life knocks you down, you can always stand tall again. Kessia's story spread far beyond the village of Doma. People spoke of her with admiration, repeating her name like a lesson. A woman who had been cast out in the rain, barefoot and humiliated, had risen without a single insult, without revenge, without shouting. She had simply returned, strong, calm, and in full control. Children were told her story as a bedtime tale. Young girls looked at her as a symbol of quiet power. Even the elders, who had once turned blind eyes to her pain, now bowed in respect whenever she passed. She became a symbol not because she fought with anger, but because she fought with dignity. Her silence that night, when Tobi threw her out, was not weakness, it was strength. It was the kind of silence that came from knowing the truth, from holding power without the need to scream about it. She knew the house was hers. She knew her time would come, and it did. Her story became a lesson for many. It showed that not every battle needs to be loud. Not every victory needs to be announced with drums. Sometimes, the most powerful move is patience, and sometimes, the quietest people carry the strongest fire in their hearts. Kessia never spoke badly about Tobi. She never mocked Lamia. She didn't seek revenge. Instead, she let the truth speak for her, and that truth was louder than any insult. It echoed through Doma and into the hearts of women who had been told they were nothing. She showed them what it means to know your worth, to rise when the world pushes you down, to walk forward with your head high, even when your feet are soaked in rain. That is what made her powerful. People now say, never underestimate a quiet woman, because of Kessia, because behind her silence was a story. Behind her calm was wisdom. Behind her fall was a rise so strong, no one saw it coming. She was the woman thrown into darkness at midnight, but who owned the dawn. If Kessia's story touched your heart, then remember, there are so many women out there who suffer in silence, just like she did. Women who are pushed down, forgotten, and left alone. But silence does not mean weakness, and tears do not mean defeat. Kessia showed us that true power lies in patience, dignity, and knowing your worth. She didn't fight with words or revenge. She let the truth speak for her, and in the end, it was her quiet strength that changed everything. If you believe every woman deserves respect, if you believe no one should be thrown out into the rain, if you believe that every silent cry deserves justice, then help us spread Kessia's story to the world. Maybe it will give strength to someone who feels powerless right now. Maybe it will remind someone that even in the darkest hour, the dawn is coming. Please like this video if Kessia inspired you. Share it with your friends and family, because this story deserves to be heard. And if you want more heart-touching stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us keep telling stories that heal, uplift, and empower. Thank you for watching. Thank you for feeling. And thank you for standing with every silent warrior like Kessia.